couple weeks ago or so, there was just like this energy that I was feeling, this idea that how often I wind up giving my own power away. And it really started to sink in. And the more I thought about it, I said, this just isn't an issue for Mike. I really think that this issue happens to all of us. And not only happens to all of us individually, it also happens to us collectively. And this has happened historically throughout all centuries and all time. And what I found fascinating as I started to think about it, I thought that, the truth is all the major traditions have tried to remind us and let us know, based on their stories that they've shared, about the thought of not doing that. To make a long story short, don't do that is kind of what the message is. And no matter what the language or no matter how the story has been told, the story has been there. And it always contains the same powerful message, or should I say, a powerful reminder, if you will. And I think the reason it has shown up so often is because it shows up so often in our own lives, time and time again. And so when we look at the different traditions, and I started researching it, I want to start off with the story in the Buddhist tradition, and it's called The Prince and the Beggar. And in that tradition, the story is the prince is separated from his family at birth, and when he's young, he actually winds up growing up as a beggar. Even though he's a prince, he still grows up, and he thinks he's poor, and he thinks he has to beg, and so therefore his identity becomes a beggar. And then all of a sudden, years later, his father finds him. But even though his father finds him, the prince still has a hard time believing that he is a prince. Because why? Because his entire identity has been built off this idea that he is a beggar and that he is poor and that he's insignificant. And that droning, that experience, those messages that were sent to him when he was growing up, becomes so ingrained in his psyche that it's hard for him to let go of this thought that he could be anything but that. And so over time, very gently, his father winds up holding him and showing him and teaching him that no, you're so much more than that. And he finally starts to believe his father and starts to live like the royalty that he is. In that story, just remember something. He's never changed. Ever. Not his status has ever changed. He was royalty before his father found him and started reminding him of who he was. But his status was all the same, whether he was the beggar or the prince. He was always royalty, always. And what changed inside of him was his awareness. And when we look at the other traditions in terms of the story, certainly I'm going to go to the Bible and talk about that. And it's been told several times in the Bible, a couple of different stories. In the New Testament, this parallels with Jesus' teaching perfectly when Jesus says, the kingdom of God is within you. The kingdom of God is within you. In that message in and of itself, remember, he's not saying it's something that you achieve. What's he saying? It's here, right now, the kingdom of God is inside of you. So this isn't, well, I have to earn it in any way, shape, or form. It's actually something that you awaken to. It's actually something that you remember, right? And then the other story in the Bible, to me, in the book of Genesis, let's go back to the beginning, which I find it so fascinating that this book that is really controlled and, dare I say, manipulated, humankind, for centuries, this happens at the beginning of the story, the beginning of the book. And what strikes me so strongly about this story is this idea that Adam and Eve suddenly become aware of good and evil. Right? They start to believe something about themselves that was really never true in the story. So remember, in the story, that they're hanging out in the Garden of Eden and everything is fine. Remember? We're good. We don't need anything. And then all of a sudden, what happens? That all of a sudden, there's a message that they're told. And the serpent shows up. And the serpent, basically, in a nutshell, says, hey, you're missing something. There's this thing over here that you need to have to be complete, to be whole. And guess what? They buy it. They buy it. They believe it. So let me get this right. They're hanging out with God. Everything is great. They've got everything that they could ever wish for, want for, desire. And all of a sudden, the serpent shows up and says, no, that's not true. You need this thing over here. And they go, oh, well, I guess we better do that thing then. And then all of a sudden, guess what happens? Then all of a sudden, where they were in the Garden of Eden and they're hanging out and everything was fine and they're walking around naked, guess what the first thing that they see is? I'm naked. I got to be afraid. I got to hide. I can't do this. And they start all of a sudden the process of not realizing or forgetting who and what they are because they believe the lie, right? They start to believe that there's something that they need in order to be whole. And in that moment, everything changes. And if you think about it, since that story has been told, everything changes for humanity as well, because now we are less than. Now we are separate from our true identity, right? And notice in this, when they do that, God never, ever, ever in that story ever tells them to be ashamed. Ever. That's not how it works. They decided that one on their own. It had nothing to do with God. And then even when God finally speaks up, God says, where are you? And it's really one of the most fascinating questions in the Bible, because understand something. God's not asking for their physical location. He kind of knows where they're at. However, what God is saying is, where have you gone in your consciousness? What are you doing? What are you doing? Like, what? I created you perfectly, just as you are. Why are you questioning me? Why? And so then all of a sudden there's this awareness, there's this understanding. And then guess what that follows? Comes up with blame. So then blame and guilt are born. And think about that historically, what that's done to us as humankind. It's basically bled into our own awareness, especially those that were brought up in a more fundamental message, like I was, and I know several of you are as well. But now we introduce this whole thing of blame. So what happens? Adam blames Eve. Well, that's convenient. So now we've got this whole thing with women. And now we're blaming women for all our problems. And then guess what? Eve then blames the serpent, right? And now we have this long tradition of refusing to take responsibility for our own consciousness. So now we are officially a victim. We don't have to take responsibility for our own consciousness. We don't have to do that, right? And so what's left, the message we're left with, honestly, is, and this one has been passed down since the beginning of time, is we're separate from God. You're less than God. You're flawed. And that you should live in guilt and shame for who you are. So in other words, you're coming out of the gate, shame, guilt, less than, separate from God. All of those messages happened within the first 5 pages of the Bible. All of them. And that history has been passed down for century after century after century after century. Right? Let that sink in for a minute. Because I'm telling you, it's impacted all of us. All of us have had a certain amount of that in our own lives, and I would say for some of us, more than others. This has been jammed down our throats. It really, really has. And we've been doomed ever since. We had, in my opinion, in some cases, it would seem like we didn't have a chance, right? Why? Because these deep-seated beliefs become our unconscious reality. Or, better yet, they become these unconscious agreements. These unconscious agreements placed in us by who? Our parents, our religions, society, all of these things. And these unconscious agreements stick. They stick. And we walk around like a bunch of zombies, operating in the dark due to these unconscious beliefs that aren't even ours. They're not. And here's the kicker. Most of us don't even know that they're there. They don't even know. We don't even know that they're there. And so part of these beliefs, we have a denial. Ultimately, at the bottom of all of it, it's a denial of who we really are. And this is how, without even knowing it, we surrender our own power as the divine beings that we are. Now, if the story were to stop right there, everybody would get up and walk out, and we'd be like this. Right? There's good news, folks. We can do something about this. But it requires a thing or two in order to change this, right? We have to change that story. We have to be willing to recognize the denial that we've been living with. All of us have been living with it. I'm going to share with you from an old book. It was funny as I was preparing for this. I love it when I just pick up a book out of my library and I land on the exact thing that I want to share. It's so cool. This little book is called The Right Use of Will, Healing and Evolving the Emotional Body. And so I just want to share with you out of this book. And it talks about this idea of denial that I think is so perfect for this. It says, and once denial has crossed the midpoint, once you have denied more than half of yourself, you must reclaim what you have lost step by step until you cross back over the midpoint. So what it's saying is, if you deny your divinity enough, and it goes past the midpoint, that's where it's hard to come back, but you can do it. When you have denied more than half of yourself, your magnetic center, your divinity, is weaker than the denial. And that's exactly the reality that we face on earth today. More than half of the spirits on earth have denied more than half of themselves. This has reflected itself as an overwhelming reality of oppression and comparison. The denial has to be recognized for it to end. I'm going to say this again. Hear this with your heart, with your soul. Let it receive this. The denial has to be recognized for it to end. Here's a wake-up call, folks. That means you. If you're sitting here, whether you're in person or you're in place, the denial has to be acknowledged. It has to be recognized for it to end. Many have tried to deny that they have any denial in order to avoid the overwhelming reality they would feel if they accepted it. If denial is not recognized, it cannot end. It does not end. It doesn't move. It doesn't move. Actually, it denses up. In this way, denial has the power to draw you into more and more dense realities. Denial. Denial of who and what we are is at the base of everything. And what this is saying is what we need to do is just to acknowledge the denial. Oh yeah, I got it. I own that. I've denied the part of me. I've denied my own divinity. And if you can stop for a minute and just go, yep, that's me, that's all that needs to happen for you to finally go, yes, there is another part of me. Yes, there's something inside of me. Yes, I know Mike's been talking about this stuff for a long time, but there is a part of me called my divinity, and all I have to do is acknowledge that I've been denying it. But now I'm going to do something about it. Now I'm going to change. So, two stories, two different traditions to illustrate the point, right? And now I want to give you the modern example, which I think you'll all have fun with. So, how many people have seen The Lion King? Show of hands. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I love The Lion King, right? But for those of you who have not, just a reminder, we have Mufasa, is a wise and a beloved king, and he's the king of the Pride Lands, and that's where he lives. And he understands who he is, and he teaches his young son, Simba, that one day he will inherit the kingdom and become the king himself. Simba is the heir apparent. He's the first son, and he's destined for greatness. But what happens is, like many young souls, he doesn't quite get that. He doesn't understand it. And his brother, Scar, now becomes jealous of Mufasa and Simba's relationship. And driven by that, he orchestrates the tragic death of his father, Mufasa's. And so what happens is Scar convinces Simba that basically it's his fault that his father was killed. And so Simba retreats because he doesn't know. He's overwhelmed by guilt. He's overwhelmed by shame, self-condemnation, and he runs away. He goes away. And rather than stepping into his destiny, it's like, not going there, not doing that. And he spends years hiding from it, right? He lives behind his home. He lives behind his purpose, his true identity. And next thing you know, he starts singing. What song does he start singing, everybody? Kuna Matata, right? Everybody knows that one. No worries. But if you think about it, it sounds like an amazing song, and occasionally I find myself humming it now and then. But was he using it as a way to avoid the pain that he was carrying and escaping the responsibility of what his destiny truly was? It kind of seems that way. So meanwhile, what's happening with the pride in the land is everything is going to ruin because now Scar is ruling the kingdom. And then all of a sudden, we have Simba's hanging out, and he runs into this crazy baboon called Rafiki. I think I'm pronouncing that name right. And he's bouncing around in the movie like you think he's this crazy character. And he's making these paintings, and he's doing these things. But he's actually, the truth is, he is a master, and he's a wise man. He's a shaman. And he's always hanging around Simba and just kind of poking at him a little bit until finally one night when Simba's having a really, really bad night, Rafiki comes up to him and says, "Come here, I want to show you something." And if you remember the movie, it's pretty cool because he takes Simba down to the water and he has Simba look in the water and encourages him to look at the water. And at first, Simba's looking at the water, and then all of a sudden, he starts to see his father, Mufasa. And in one of the most powerful lines in the entire movie, Mufasa is reminding him who he really is. And he says, "Remember who you are. Remember who you are." He doesn't tell him to become something new. He doesn't tell him he needs to earn anything. He doesn't tell him he needs to prove himself. He simply tells him, "Remember. Remember who you are. You're my son. You are the rightful king. It was yours all along. You're more than the guilt that you carry. You're more than the story you've been telling yourself." And at that moment, Simba realizes, finally wakes up, that he spent years living in this false impression, this false identity, the false belief, that his real problem was never the death of his father, ever, that his real problem was believing the lie that he was unworthy of that inheritance. And once he remembers who he is, then everything starts to change. And as the story goes, he returns home and he reclaims his kingdom, his place. Three different stories, different times, different cultures, same message. And it's a reminder. And it's a reminder of you remembering who you already are. You're already divine. You don't have to earn that. The only thing you have to do is acknowledge it and accept it. Right? I really hope there was something in our talk today that you get to take away from this. And I really hope, if anything, my hope and prayer is that you understand that this doesn't take years and years and decades and centuries to overturn this. It doesn't. It starts with you making a simple decision. That's where it starts. Remember, it's about the denial and acknowledging the denial, because we have so long denied this divinity within us. And all you have to do is start to acknowledge it. Acknowledge the denial. Yes, yeah, that was me. I did that. But now I'm not doing that anymore. And as of this moment, right here, right now, I am no longer going to deny my divinity. I'm going to fully acknowledge it. And not only am I going to acknowledge it inside of myself, I'm also going to acknowledge it in everybody I see, because we're all the same. We're all exactly the same. So thank you. Thank you for coming here this morning in the dark, dreary weather. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a beautiful reflection of the divine that you are. You bless us by coming here. We are tremendously grateful and thankful for you. So I hope you have a really, really awesome day. I hope somewhere in it you'll remember who you are, because you are absolutely a beautiful, 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 shining reflection of God. Thank you so much for being who and what you are. We are grateful to have you. God bless. Namaste and Namaway. Thank you.